Harrison King was the kind of man who seemed to have it all: a thriving career as a corporate attorney, a beautiful home in the quiet suburbs, and a loving wife, Lydia, who was his high school sweetheart. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple, living the quintessential American dream. Lydia was the ideal partner, supportive and caring, always standing by Harrison through his long working hours and high-pressure job. She was a part-time art teacher at the local community center, and her gentle nature made her well-loved by the neighborhood. They had been married for over 15 years and had a 9-year-old son named Noah, who was the center of their world. But behind the closed doors of their pristine, colonial-style house, cracks were beginning to form. Harrison's long hours at the office were starting to take a toll on their marriage, and Lydia had begun to feel lonely and neglected. Despite her efforts to revive their relationship, the spark they once had seemed to be fading away. Enter Amelia, Lydia's cousin. Amelia was everything Lydia wasn't: bold, adventurous, and uninhibited. She had recently moved to town after a messy divorce and needed a place to stay. Lydia, always the compassionate one, offered her the guest room until she could get back on her feet. Harrison wasn't thrilled with the arrangement, but he knew how much family meant to Lydia, so he reluctantly agreed. From the moment Amelia moved in, things started to change. Amelia's presence was like a breath of fresh air for Harrison, who had grown tired of the monotony of his daily life. Unlike Lydia, who was introverted and cautious, Amelia was flirtatious and full of life. She would often joke with Harrison, her laughter echoing through the house, and her carefree attitude seemed to draw him in. At first, Lydia was relieved that Harrison appeared to be more relaxed and happy. She didn't mind Amelia's playful banter, and even appreciated how it seemed to lift Harrison's spirits. But as the days turned into weeks, Lydia began to notice the subtle changes in Harrison's behavior. He started coming home earlier, taking more care with his appearance, and his mood was almost too good to be true. One evening, Lydia walked into the living room to find Harrison and Amelia sitting too close on the couch, whispering and laughing in a way that made her stomach churn. She brushed it off, telling herself she was being paranoid. But as the weeks went by, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. Amelia had a way of lingering in the kitchen when Harrison was around, her hand casually brushing his arm as she reached for a glass, her laughter a little too loud, and her gaze lingering a little too long. It wasn't just Lydia who noticed. Neighbors began to talk, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. Lydia's best friend, Claire, even hinted that maybe it wasn't a good idea to have Amelia around so much. But Lydia dismissed it all, choosing to trust her husband and her cousin, despite the nagging doubts in the back of her mind. One rainy evening, while Lydia was tucking Noah into bed, she heard Amelia's unmistakable laughter coming from the kitchen. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, straining to hear the conversation. The words were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. Lydia's heart raced as she slowly made her way downstairs, trying to remain calm. As she rounded the corner, she saw it: Harrison and Amelia standing too close, his hand on her waist, their faces inches apart. They didn't notice Lydia at first, lost in their own world. Lydia's gasp made them jump apart, their expressions a mix of shock and guilt. "What's going on here?" Lydia's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes darting between her husband and cousin. "Lydia, it's not what it looks like," Harrison stammered, stepping away from Amelia. Amelia, ever the quick thinker, plastered a smile on her face and shrugged. "We were just talking, Lydia. You're overreacting." But Lydia knew better. There was no mistaking the look in Harrison's eyes, or the tension that hung heavy in the air. Her world, once so perfect, was beginning to crumble around her. She turned on her heel and ran upstairs, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. That night, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as the storm raged outside. She knew something was happening between Harrison and Amelia, but she had no idea just how far it would go or how much it would eventually cost them all. The days that followed were tense and filled with awkward silence. Lydia tried to confront Harrison about what she had seen, but he brushed it off as a misunderstanding, insisting that she was being irrational. Amelia, on the other hand, seemed unfazed, continuing to flaunt her presence around the house with the same boldness that had initially charmed Harrison. Lydia's trust in her husband was shattered, but she couldn't bring herself to throw Amelia out. They were family, after all, and Lydia's guilt and insecurity kept her from making any drastic decisions. Instead, she turned inward, withdrawing from everyone around her, including Noah, who sensed his mother's distress but couldn't understand the reason behind it. Harrison, emboldened by Lydia's silence, became more reckless. He would come home late, his clothes reeking of perfume that wasn't Lydia's. He spent more time at the gym, texting on his phone with a smile that Lydia hadn't seen in years. The distance between them grew, and Lydia felt like a stranger in her own home. One evening, when Lydia was returning from her art class, she saw Harrison's car parked outside a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. Her heart pounded as she parked a little way down the street, her mind racing. She knew what she was about to do was wrong, but she needed to know the truth. She waited, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. After what felt like an eternity, the motel door opened and out stepped Harrison, followed closely by Amelia. Lydia felt her world collapse as she watched them laugh, their hands brushing as they walked to Harrison's car. There was no mistaking the look of intimacy between them, the way they moved in sync, completely oblivious to the world around them. Lydia followed them home, her mind numb and her heart shattered. She parked in the driveway, waiting for them to enter the house before stumbling inside herself. She was met with the sight of them standing in the kitchen, their laughter stopping abruptly when they saw her. "Lydia, what are you doing?" Harrison's voice was filled with annoyance, but Lydia didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at the two of them, feeling a mixture of rage and betrayal. Amelia smirked, her eyes cold and calculating. "Oh, come on, Lydia. Don't make a scene. It's not what you think." Lydia's voice was barely a whisper. "Get out." Amelia's smile faded, and she took a step forward, but Harrison held up his hand. "Lydia, stop this. We can talk about it." But Lydia was done talking. She repeated more forcefully this time, "Get out of my house." Amelia hesitated, but then, with a shrug, she grabbed her purse and sauntered out of the door. Harrison stared after her for a moment before turning back to Lydia, his eyes filled with anger. "This is ridiculous, Lydia. You're blowing everything out of proportion." Lydia felt a surge of anger. "Blowing things out of proportion. I just saw you leave a motel with her, Harrison. You've been lying to me, betraying me in my own home." Harrison looked away, running a hand through his hair. "I made a mistake, okay? It just happened, but she means nothing to me. We can fix this." Lydia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You've broken everything, Harrison. I don't even know who you are anymore." Harrison tried to reach out to her, but Lydia stepped back, her eyes cold. "Stay away from me." That night, Lydia moved into the guest room, putting a barrier between herself and the man she had once trusted with her life. She began avoiding him at every opportunity, throwing herself into her work at the art center and spending more time with Noah. She tried to pretend that everything was fine for her son's sake, but deep down, she knew their lives would never be the same. Meanwhile, Harrison and Amelia's affair continued, but with a new intensity. The thrill of secrecy had been replaced by a dangerous game of defiance. They no longer cared who knew or what the consequences might be. Harrison moved Amelia into a small apartment downtown, where they could meet freely without the prying eyes of the neighborhood. But the more time Harrison spent with Amelia, the more he realized how toxic their relationship had become. What had started as an exciting escape from his mundane life was now suffocating him. Amelia was possessive and manipulative, demanding more and more of his time and money. She began to show up at his office, calling him incessantly, accusing him of cheating on her whenever he spent time with Lydia and Noah. Harrison felt trapped, torn between the life he had destroyed and the affair that was spiraling out of control. He tried to break things off with Amelia, but she threatened to expose their relationship to everyone, including Lydia's family and Harrison's colleagues. She had nothing to lose, and she made it clear that if she couldn't have him, she would make sure no one else could either. Desperate and scared, Harrison confided in his best friend, Mark, who warned him to be careful. "You need to end this, Harrison. She's dangerous. You're playing with fire." Harrison nodded, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Amelia wasn't just going to walk away quietly. He had to find a way to protect himself, his family, and the remnants of his shattered life. Little did he know, the flames of their affair were about to consume them all in a way he could never have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, the tension between Jonathan and Rebecca escalated, a powder keg ready to explode. Rebecca, consumed by anger and betrayal, devised a plan. If Jonathan wouldn't end things with Emily, she would take matters into her own hands. One night, after Jonathan left for work, Rebecca decided to confront Emily directly. She drove to the small apartment where Emily lived, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and resolve. When she arrived, she knocked hard on the door, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Emily answered, her expression shifting from surprise to fear as she recognized Rebecca. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Stepping back, Rebecca pushed past her, anger radiating off her. "We need to talk. You're ruining my family." Emily, feeling cornered, stammered, "I didn't mean for this to happen. I care about him." "Care?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "You're just using him for his money and status. You think you can just waltz into our lives and take what's mine? I didn't." Before Emily could finish, Rebecca lunged forward, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Stay away from my husband. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Emily's eyes widened in fear. "Please, just let me go. This needs to end." "Maybe it does," Rebecca said, her voice low and chilling, "but it's not going to end the way you think." The confrontation left Emily shaken, her mind racing with the implications. The next morning, she called Jonathan, desperate for reassurance. "I think we need to talk about Rebecca. She's not backing down," she said, her voice trembling. Jonathan sighed heavily, guilt and anxiety flooding him. "I'll handle it," he promised, but deep down, he felt the walls closing in. In the days that followed, Jonathan tried to navigate the treacherous waters of his marriage and his affair. He thought he could appease Rebecca while keeping Emily close, but it was a delicate balance, one that was rapidly unraveling. One rainy night, as Jonathan returned home late, he found Rebecca waiting for him, her demeanor unsettling. "We need to talk," she said, her tone cold. Jonathan's stomach dropped. "What now?" "I know you're still seeing her," Rebecca said, her voice steady but laced with malice. "You need to choose, me or her." "Rebecca, because if you don't, I will make sure you lose everything," she interrupted, her eyes flashing with determination. That night, after a heated argument, Jonathan lay awake, grappling with his choices. He couldn't ignore Rebecca's threat. He had to end things with Emily, but his heart ached at the thought of losing her. As if sensing his turmoil, Emily called later that evening. "I can't keep doing this, Jonathan. You need to decide," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I know," he replied, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, "but it's complicated." Emily's silence spoke volumes. "I won't be the other woman forever. You need to fix this with Rebecca." The following day, in a moment of desperation, Jonathan met Rebecca at a local cafe. He had to put an end to the chaos. "I want to work on our marriage," he said, forcing the words out. Rebecca's expression softened for just a moment. "Are you serious?" But as Jonathan opened up about his feelings and the need for change, Rebecca's facade cracked. "I can't just forget what you did," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You don't get to choose when it's convenient for you." That night, as Jonathan returned home, he found Emily waiting for him. "Did you end it?" she asked, her voice laced with hope. "I tried, but she's not letting go," he confessed, his heart heavy with defeat. Emily's face fell. "Then I can't be part of this anymore." Just as he reached for her, the door swung open, revealing Rebecca standing in the doorway, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice low and menacing. "Rebecca, it's not what it looks like," Jonathan stammered. But Rebecca wasn't listening. In a fit of rage, she lunged at Emily, and a struggle ensued. Jonathan grabbed Rebecca, pulling her back. "Stop. This isn't the answer," he shouted, panic surging through him. In the chaos, a knife from the kitchen was knocked to the floor. In the scuffle, it ended up in Rebecca's hand. Without a moment's hesitation, she lunged at Emily, the blade glinting in the dim light. "No!" Jonathan screamed, but it was too late. The knife pierced Emily's side, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Time froze as Jonathan rushed to Emily's side, cradling her head in his hands. "Call an ambulance," he yelled at Rebecca, who stood frozen in shock, her eyes wide with horror. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Jonathan's mind raced with disbelief and despair. He couldn't comprehend the horror that had just unfolded. Emily's life hung by a thread, and the love affair that had brought him joy now stood as a harbinger of tragedy. The aftermath was chaotic. Emily was rushed to the hospital, and Jonathan was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. Rebecca was arrested on the spot, her face pale as reality set in. Weeks later, as Jonathan sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, he reflected on how everything had spiraled out of control. The affair had cost him everything he held dear, and as he waited for news about Emily, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life would never be the same again. When Emily finally awoke, she looked at Jonathan with tears in her eyes. "Why, Jonathan? Why did it have to come to this?" His heart shattered at her words. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I thought we could be happy, but at what cost?" she whispered, pain evident in her voice. Jonathan realized that in his pursuit of happiness, he had created a tragedy. As he held her hand, he vowed to find a way to make amends, even if it meant facing the harsh consequences of his past. In the end, the affair had become a dark chapter in their lives, a tale of passion turned deadly. It served as a grim reminder that secrets and lies can have devastating consequences, and the search for love can sometimes lead to heartbreak and loss.